Our intention is to identify common assumptions and challenges in engaging youth in climate resilience work and to have a collaborative brainstorm on ideas for how to engage youth in a meaningful way. So we will call upon you, get ready. I do know some of your names. We recognize that youth are very impacted by climate change and more importantly, can help us all have a longer term view in the way that we do things. And therefore, youth engagement is so needed as a key element to climate resilience building. None of us have all the answers, and we hope you help us today with organizing some ideas and formulating what those engagement perspectives look like and how to do it. And finally, the end of the whole forum will have hopefully a list of tips on how to engage youth for your organization and the work that you do. So to get started, our wonderful panel here, I just want to introduce them to you. They're going to have about 5 minutes each to talk about their experience, and then we'll have an opportunity to engage with each other and talk more about how to incorporate youth. So Austin Zaccaro. Yes, okay. He's our business development with SunGrid Solutions, which focuses on building solar and battery energy storage systems. Austin holds a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering, a Master's of Engineering in Sustainable Energy, and he has expertise in sustainability, decarbonization, and climate change. As a professional and member of the Métis Nation of Alberta, Austin brings an Indigenous perspective to his work. He's also an avid outdoor enthusiast and community volunteer. Austin. Next on our panel, we have Hannah Bain. Hannah is a Master's of Science in Epidemiology, a student at the University of Alberta currently. Her focus is on climate change, with the Climate Change and Global Health Research Group. Her research currently right now focuses on music as a climate adaptation strategy. Very interesting. And she holds a Bachelor of Science majoring in psychology and minoring in music. As an active volunteer with Girl Guides of Canada and Climate Justice Edmonton, she also enjoys the great outdoors and playing the flute and the piano, as well as reading. And finally, we have Jeff Zakruski. Thank you. He is a professional planner and a senior resilience advisor with Associated Engineering. So his expertise is in climate risk and vulnerability assessments and climate resilience action planning development. He's got 15 years working with organizations, communities, and including over 40 municipalities. His work engages climate adaptation resilience strategy development, decision-making, and implementation. So this is your panel, and today we're just going to start off with Austin, a little bit about your experience.
Hello, okay, you can hear me. Mic's working. Yeah, great to be here. Nice to see everyone. Great turnout. As it was introduced, my name's Austin, born and raised here in Edmonton, part of the Métis Nation of Alberta. I wear a few different hats. Professionally, I work for SunGrid, so we're a construction company that builds and operates solar and battery energy storage. So in my day job, I really focus on decarbonization and the electricity grid. Really interesting to put that in perspective. How do our electricity grids need to change and adapt as the climate changes and as we need more electricity? I also sit on the board of FES, which stands for Finance, Equip, and Sustain. We provide grants to youth organizations across Canada, and we're a registered charity. So I help oversee some of the granting and some of the management at FES. And then in a previous life, I also was on a steering committee for Leading Change Canada, which helps provide youth opportunities to attend conferences and events across Canada within industries and get exposure. So lots of different avenues about climate change, youth perspectives. One day, I guess I still am a youth, but I used to be that 18-year-old guy who would walk around at conferences, ask all these hard-hitting questions at the microphone and get angry when the old people would have the same answer as, "You're too young, you don't understand." So yeah, hopefully we can talk more about it and come up with some collaborative solutions together.
Awesome. Thank you, Austin. Hannah?
Hello, everybody. So my name is Hannah. As introduced, I am a Master's of Science student at the University of Alberta. But today I'm coming to you with my kind of like climate educator hat on. So I'm a longtime member of Girl Guides of Canada. I did the program as a kid and then have been a leader for 6 years. This includes a lot of kind of conservation, sustainability, outdoors education with young girls and gender diverse kids. And that's kind of where a lot of my inspiration for how much I think that young people, especially children, came from in terms of how they need to be involved in climate change. And then as I came into my undergraduate program and working with the Climate Change and Global Health Research Group, as well as into my master's, I have been on our amazing outreach team that has designed lessons that are curriculum relevant, engaging, and mental health focused for young people. Generally, we have been focusing on late elementary, but lately getting more into junior high and high school. And so we teach these outreach lessons through the U School program, which brings kids from socially underserved communities into the University of Alberta, as well as Edmonton Public School Board's community marketplace programs that brings experts into schools in Edmonton. And we teach these lessons, bringing high quality education from experts about climate change and public health and those intersections. These are super fun, and we've adapted them for outreach activities as well, looking at kind of like big community events and conferences for those age groups. And so a lot of my experience with climate change and young people comes from working with kids and comes from working with them and knowing how they are, worried and concerned and have ideas for their future that they want it to look like. So I would say I'm also pretty young, but also bringing this perspective, I want to speak from my experience and what I've learned from them. Kids as young as 8 and 9 have some really amazing ideas about our future.
Thank you, Hannah. And finally, Jeff.
Hello. Yeah, well, thanks everyone. Thanks for having me here on the youth panel. Feeling pretty young. So I guess going back, so I guess the 4 to 5 minute story about my background is that in 2007, I worked with an organization called the Columbia Basin Trust, and they started an initiative called, had the unfortunate acronym of CACI. So CACI stands for Communities Adapting to Climate Change Initiative. And they were, I think, as far as I know, one of the first organizations in Canada to really engage communities in climate adaptation planning. And I was fortunate to be involved in that initiative in 2007. I worked with the first 2 communities in Canada that did climate adaptation plans. That would be Elkford and Kimberley. As far as I know, if you know of another one before that, let me know. But I spent about 10 years working with Columbia Basin Trust on the CACI initiative. And my role was really simple. It was to go around to communities all over the Kootenays and talk about climate change and engage communities in talking about impacts and assessing risks and developing adaptation plans. And yeah, I think one of the really interesting things that we learned through the first few years of that process was that especially rural communities, they don't have a lot of time to spend on, we were doing these 1 and 2 year long adaptation planning processes, and these smaller communities were just like, we don't have time for this. Can you just design something that's simple? So we took that 1 to 2 year process and distilled it down to a 1-day climate adaptation planning process. And so then we rolled with that for a few years. And I think it was about 2014 or 15, I worked with the MCCAC here in Alberta with Ronak and Trina's predecessor. Or maybe Trina was there at the time. But we really took that, what we learned in BC about these sort of rapid climate adaptation planning processes and applied that to Alberta. So we launched this Climate Resilience Express program in Alberta. I believe there was about 15 or so municipalities that went through that program over a 4 or 5 year period. And yeah, since then I've again worked with dozens of municipalities. Primarily, I'm a planner, so primarily my role is assessing risks, assessing vulnerabilities, developing plans and strategies to help communities adapt to changing climate. I've also been involved in developing a bunch of different tools and resources. I know Mr. Schneider was here talking about trees, and people are wondering, well, what trees do we plant? Well, I worked with the city of Edmonton a few years ago. There's actually a really cool tree planting guide for the city of Edmonton. So what trees should you plant in the future? I've also built tools for homeowners and to help homeowners understand what they can do to make their house more resilient. Community planning guidebooks, business tools, so helping businesses understand how to manage risks and assess risks. So I guess all that to say, I think going back to sort of the youth engagement component here. So most of my projects involve some sort of public engagement, right? So if you're doing a climate adaptation plan for a municipality, we're doing community surveys or open houses, and there's youth involved with that. But I would say very, very rarely have I ever been involved in a targeted youth engagement. So I'm probably the wrong guy to have on the panel. I think I'm the only one that was willing to come up here. So that's why I'm here. I guess Caitlin's here. She used to work for the city of Spruce Grove. We did do some targeted student engagement in the city of Spruce Grove when we developed their adaptation plan. And that's about it. I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to just join you. Oh, there is a mic here. I stole this one from over there. So City of Edmonton has done a lot of work with public engagement. We do try to look at multiple organizations and communities, really going down to maybe the neighbor level, going into schools. And it's really important to us to be able to get all the different perspectives because it feeds into our programming, the way that we make decisions. But it is still I would say a continuing conversation on how do you look at engagement as a process, engagement versus kind of information sharing, when do those lines cross? And so maybe our first question to you and maybe starting with you, Jeff, like when you're looking at key components of the initiating an engagement process with youth, what are some of the things in the past that you've used, and then maybe some questions about maybe things that you might have missed, or like just looking back, what would that be?
Okay, so I'd probably start to answer that question by saying that what I've done generally, which is not engage youth, is probably not the right approach. So I'm to answer this question, I think about the IAP2 spectrum, the International Association for Public Participation. So it's really a spectrum about how you do public engagement, right? And I think youth are part of that, and I think that effective youth engagement starts with wanting to engage youth and having a plan to engage youth, and also partnering with youth when you're developing that plan, right? So again, I'm a planner. I come from the perspective of helping if I'm working with a city or a town or a municipality, and I want to do a climate adaptation plan and I want to engage youth in that plan, then the starting point is let's make a concerted effort to get youth involved from the start in terms of scoping the project. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? Have specific strategies in place to make sure that youth are engaged. I don't know what those strategies and tools are. I think they probably involve maybe like social media things, but I don't know about those. And then really listening to what they have to say, right? So, and when I've done youth engagement in the past, it's generally, asking questions like, how is climate change going to affect us, or how will it affect you as a youth in our town? What do you think the city or town should do about some of those issues? So, yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. So it sounds like be intentful and really start by asking the questions. I want to turn it over to you, Hannah. When you're looking at research, what does that look like in terms of selecting ways to better engage youth as a part of your research? What kind of key components do you think about?
Absolutely. I think the first step in any youth engagement process is to consider what level of youth you want to engage, because engaging people in their early to mid 20s looks incredibly different than engaging a 9-year-old. Okay, actually I say incredibly different. Everybody likes to color, I will say, like, don't worry. They also like stickers. Everybody likes stickers, does not matter what age you are. But that's going to really influence actually how you're targeting your research or even your engagement process. So thinking about that is going to be your first step. And ensuring that you're speaking the language and understanding the context that each kind of like set of age groups is coming from. If you're engaging with people in their early 20s, recognizing that maybe what they're considering right now is like, what does my future look like in terms of job opportunities? What does my future look like in terms of ability to afford a house or to live in a city? Whereas a kid who's looking to be, who maybe on the younger age is more looking towards like, what is my summer going to look like with all these wildfires and that kind of stuff? And so that's going to be the really major step, is understanding their context and where they're coming from. And that is also super applicable in research. So making sure that you're like, okay, so I'm interested in targeting children for this project. What is that actually going to look like?
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks so much. Like, yeah, it makes me think of different people's perspective, and especially youth, of what future means. So my future might be 5 years from now, but my daughter who's 14, her future is 5 seconds from now. So yeah, that's really insightful. Thank you. And Austin, looking at engaging youth when you're thinking about concepts like decarbonization, what are some of the key components you think would be important in engaging on such a large, wide landscape topic?
Yeah, great question. I think the biggest aspect of youth engagement that I've been a part of is having youth engagement steering committees or councils. With FES, we re-grant funds to grassroots organizations across Canada. So we have millions of dollars each year that we can choose, and we always have more applications than we can provide. So we have the difficult task of finding where we're going to be able to allocate those funds and where they're going to be the most useful. So part of that process was actually developing a youth committee from across Canada that's engaged in the areas that our grants are meant to go. So climate adaptation, Indigenous perspectives, and climate resiliency. I might have messed that up. Hopefully no one from FES is listening. And so we have a youth steering committee of 10 folks who come together, and then they set up meetings. We do analysis of all the grants that we get, and they have like decision-making authority to a certain extent. We work collaboratively between the staff members and the youth steering committee to actually figure out where these funds are going to go. So having youth engaged in this process in a meaningful way. And I think that's really important too, is being clear to youth in, for example, a steering committee. What's the expectations of this steering committee? How much power are you going to have? Are we just going to take your opinions and say thank you, and then we'll decide if we're going to use them later? Are we actually going to be able to make these decisions alongside you and show you what decisions we're making and provide you that feedback? Are you going to be tokenized or greenwashed, or are you going to be included in meaningful ways? I think that level of trust is really important to youth. I think youth are angry at sometimes. When I talk to a lot of youth in these climate spaces, they're angry that the older generation left them this mess that they have to clean up. And I think it's really about working together and collaboratively and having open conversations. A lot of the times there's a lot of friction and contention between youth and non-youth, and being able to bridge that gap and work effectively together is the most important way forward in my perspective.
Great, thank you. Before I turn it over to everybody here for your perspectives, or just telling us what has been successful for you, just as a quick recap. So what we're hearing is just being intentful and making sure that there is a process in place and you're thinking about what that looks like. And from Hannah's perspective, really making sure that the group age of the youth that you're looking at, you're making sure that that context is in play as you're thinking about that. And then again, just really making sure that there is meaningful feedback and that the engagement will result in, whether it's decision-making or knowledge building, that's there. I'm totally not waiting for the City of Edmonton crew to stand up and ask the question that I asked them to, just biding some time as we get them there. But is there any, Kara, messages from Mentimeter or anybody from the audience that has had really successful experiences engaging youth?
I see. I might actually want to jump in here. This is Hannah over here. I want to just talk maybe to the decarbonize thing that you just said. So talking about these really big ticket issues. And this maybe plays into sometimes these assumptions that we have about youth. So I just want to highlight that this year's delegation of young people to COP28 was the decarbonize. That was their platform. So 60 youth from around the world went to Dubai and they advocated, they actually got to talk with decision makers and they really got to make themselves known and they got to plan their entire platform. I was really lucky to get to know one of these youth. She's a ranger in Sherwood Park. That ranger is the highest level of Girl Guides. There we go. That's the context. I got to talk with her and we got to sit down and really brainstorm what she wanted to bring to the table from her perspective as somebody who's grown up on the prairies in Canada. And she had an amazing time and they have made some really amazing strides in bringing youth perspectives and they completely have the capacity to understand these complex, intricate issues. Youth care, youth are knowledgeable. They should have better access to high quality climate change education through their schooling. And that was a big thing that Shelby, this ranger, brought up in her coming back. So I just want to maybe bring that up, that is an example of youth taking charge.
No, that's really good. Like that's my assumption that some of these topics are too complex. There's too many, deep dives that you can go, but it sounds like with interest and with certain youth, they are willing to participate in that. So I shouldn't make the assumption that it's too big or it's too much.
I think you were first.
Were you first? Yeah. Okay, sorry.
No, you go first. Thank you so much. That was really, really interesting so far. And thanks for all of your perspectives. I appreciated, Hannah, your comment on considering the age group that you're engaging and more on the children's side of thing. It made me think of my own experience as a parent. Just last month, my 3-year-old said, "Mommy, what is climate change?" And as a climate change researcher, I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know how to explain this to a 3-year-old. So I was just wondering if you have any advice on how to engage the children spectrum side of things.
Yes, this is a really great question. And I think it comes back to a lot of land-based learning and a lot of engagement with their environment and their natural world. So I was talking with some friends a few months ago and somebody brought up a study. It's the kind of person I am, my friends and I talk about studies. But they said that this psychologist had shown that kids can identify over 100 corporate logos, but often cannot identify more than 5 plants. So I think that is a really big component of it. So you can explain climate change even to a 3-year-old. They do get it. We ran an activity at the Science Center 2 years ago and looking at adding greenhouse gases. What are sources of greenhouse gases? We put blankets on the earth. The earth has a fever. Kids get that. And it's actually a really good metaphor if you follow it all the way. But really allowing them to engage with their natural world so that they can see and understand where they come from, where they live, and the land that supports them and allows them to live and play, I think is the first step. Because when we look at what drives our climate action, as you know, Sherry, right, it's love, it's care for our planet. And so inspiring that care is, I think, the first step to inspiring kids who can cope and take action with the climate crisis as they get older.
Thank you. That's a really good concept. Planet has a fever.
Hello. Thank you for the panel so far. So question, Austin, I'm really happy you brought up the FES kind of board and the youth that are part of this committee and that they do have kind of decision-making authority within this, which I think is a really great example. And Hannah as well, your example of the COP28 youth panel and having agency to kind of decide where that goes. So essentially my question is, I think this happens a lot where we want to engage with youth, and it is done in kind of a tokenized way, as you said, Austin, that, it's like, okay, this is a great idea. We want to hear what the young people are thinking, but then, the young people are angry. And I think they are angry. And as a young person, there's a reason for that, right? I think we do have to respect that. So I guess my question ultimately is, and as a young person too, like I think maybe other people can relate. I didn't really understand where I fit in this space until I got a little bit older. And had the confidence to know that I knew some things. So I'm wondering where that intersection is between involving youth and engaging youth in a good way, and also providing agency, like some of the examples you shared. So we can tell youth that, you do have we'd love to say you're the leaders of the future, you're so inspiring, but like to say, okay, here's the process, here's how you fit in it, here's how you make sure when you're sharing your voice or sharing your opinion or your anger, that you need to also make sure that these people are listening to you and using it and not just being the check mark on the engagement process. So I'm wondering specifically, Hannah and Austin, if you have any more kind of advice maybe to your younger self or other people or people in the room that want to engage youth, how do you also provide them agency to make sure that their voice is heard and that they can, follow up to ensure that they're not just that kind of token check mark?
Think a lot of this, that is a really great question. And I think this starts early. I think it starts by teaching kids about advocacy and activism, because you have to learn those skills. They're not things you can just know and develop. And I think it comes down to supporting young people in this learning at a young age. So I think to an example of a Girl Guide meeting we did just a few months ago, and the theme was advocacy and activism. And we had the kids identify what they cared about and also ways that they can talk about it. And I will say, you might like this, Jeff. One of my kids is very passionate about urban sprawl. She thinks it's terrible. She's like very passionate about it. But they have these ideas, and then by actually showing them through a process that's a safe space where they can mess up and feel like confident in like speaking out loud about it, or like telling you why they care about it. And it really is practice. And I think maybe as if you are going to look to engage youth in a way where you cannot necessarily provide that practice, maybe this is just something to like advocate for if you're a parent or if you are involved with youth groups. Like maybe like we should do a meeting about how to make a speech, something like that. But if you're looking to it at the beginning, is helping them by being like a sounding board and taking their ideas back to them, maybe in like a pre-meeting, allowing them to do that work with somebody who is maybe a little bit more relatable. So maybe it's a younger person on your team, can sit down with them and be like, hey, I'm super excited for our upcoming like consultation with our broader team. Let's have a meeting where we just go through your ideas, what you're thinking, and I'm just here to help you like streamline it so we can make sure they listen.
Yeah, great answer. I don't know if I'm going to answer your question, so interrupt me if I don't. But when you're talking, the biggest thing that I thought is for the non-youth, it's really, I think the biggest thing is accepting that frustration and that anger is like a valid feeling and not minimizing it and not dismissing it. So allowing people to say like, yes, your emotions are valid. Like, how can we work through this, or like, how can we turn that productively? And then for the youth, I've never gotten anything productive done when I've been in a state of frustration or anger. I think they're great motivating states, but to actually be able to be conscious enough to be able to move through that and say, how can I be productive? For me, that's either action or activism. So how are you advocating, or how are you producing action? So for me, it's like, can you work with your community to put like small solar panels on a greenhouse, or solar panels on your school, or something like that, like these small projects that are feasible for youth, that create action and create a ripple effect, or the activism, whether that's your political leaders, your family, all really interesting things. I was once told by a friend that whenever political elections happen, they sit down as a family and they debate internally, and then they all come to a consensus, and their entire family, whoever's over the age of 18, votes collectively. So their house is like a voting block, and they provide like youth, different, like the children of the house and the adults of the house, like all time to speak. I think that's just like a really cool example of that.
Great, thank you.
That's a really good idea. Just looking at the time, I think we'll take this as our last question.
Oh, thank you. So I think the panelists have kind of touched on this a little bit when talking about how angry our youth are. But I wanted to kind of bring up how I think a lot of our youth are quite scared or anxious about their future. And I think that's a big driver in why they want to get involved. And also just their thoughts and emotions around climate change in general. And I think when it comes to dealing with that climate anxiety that honestly, probably everybody in this room also is very familiar with. I think a great question to maybe be asking our youth is what do they envision for their futures and what do they want to see for their future? Because I think a lot of the maybe dreams and hopes that they have for their future have changed. So kind of an example that I would have would be maybe instead of envisioning owning my own home in the suburb with like a lawn, instead my dreams center around having a community with walkable services. So I was just wondering, what were your like any panelists can answer, but what do you think the youth that you interact with, what are they envisioning?
I pulled a few quotes and questions from some of the lessons that I've had that I just want to highlight that show that kids as young as like 9 and 10, and I don't have any quotes from younger than that. I'm sure they'd ask the same questions just to echo these feelings. So this is some questions from grade 5 students. So if the government knows what to do, why aren't they doing it? Trying to explain lobbying to grade 5s was not, it worked. There's some more questions. There are so many people working on this. Why can't they get anything done? And a lot of ideas that come in the form of the question, why can't we just blank? Young people see a future, they see a future of radical change and action. And that's as young as like actually like kids. When I talk to my own peers, people my own age, we have the exact same questions and we have some ideas about what our future looks like with like radical shifts in like economic and social systems. And so I think understanding that young people who are passionate about the climate crisis are passionate often about the whole climate justice issue, not just climate change. Like when I talk to my kids at guides, they are all very concerned about the environment. It is something they talk about a lot, but they also talk about like the way that we treat unhoused people in the city of Edmonton. I have one kid get incredibly emotional over the sweeps that happened back in December. I had one who went to the rally to protect trans kids, and she is very passionate about that issue. And so when we see this desire for these like social changes as well. And I totally agree with you. I think my like vision of my future is fully like 15-minute communities, you know? And so recognizing that there are radical attitudes and that sometimes the visions of their future might be uncomfortable because they completely challenge the status quo. And youth are going to ask you questions like, you know, why can't we just? If we know what the right action is, why aren't we doing it? And you know, you might have an answer that's like, well, the bureaucracy and all of that. And I get it. But also at the same time, maybe challenging your own internal ideas about what that actually means for you. You're like, okay, why can't we just? And is that reason bureaucracy? Because that is human caused. We made that up so we can unmake it. And other things like that, those kinds of questions I think are very important to do some inner reflection on, especially when in a lot of our day-to-day work, I know me included, you know, you get bogged down in the, oh, I have to apply for this grant, I have to write this report, and all those like machinations of the bureaucracy and the way that our like systems actually function. But can we change those systems? How do we change those systems? Where can you start leveraging against those systems in your work?
Thank you, Hannah. That's brilliant. And I think we can all have had that experience before and understand. But thank you for the insight. I think we've all been in sidebar hallway conversations asking those questions. And in fact, if you hadn't told me that they were coming from kids, I would have said, oh, did you read my mind? I just want to throw kind of the last opportunity to Jeff. You've heard a lot of information on what can be done or what has been done and some insight. So in your work with community organizations, what are you seeing that can be part of your intentful engagement process with youth?
Sure. I mean, I first want to just touch on the kid question of why can't we just, and really the answer to that is that we have a limited number of resources and people and money to do things, right? And so in in some parallel room somewhere, people are having the same conversation about how do we engage seniors, how do we engage elders, how do we engage minority groups, how do we engage families, and all these conversations. So there's a lot of work to be done, right? And I think the other big context thing that I think about here is, I mean, we're talking about engaging youth in climate change and climate resilience, but I think there's a bigger question of like, how do we engage youth in governance and in community planning and decision making? I had a great conversation with Brett last night about this, and he shared with me what their community does. I don't know if you want to share that, Brett, or do you mind if I just say quickly? Yeah, I guess I don't know, I might not do it, Jazz. You can talk to Brett about it, but in his community, there's a youth that sit on council, and they actually have a voting seat on council in the community. And I was like, oh, it's like such a great thing to get the youth involved and actually have decision-making power on council. So let's do that.
Great. I think what we're ending up with is just the words of Bob the Builder. Yes, we can. And we can with youth. So really appreciate all your insights, and thank you for coming to the panel session today. Just a plug in, 15-minute communities are coming your way in the city of Edmonton. So that's wonderful, and there's going to be lots more engagement in that. But thank you so much to everybody who participated and your questions. As I said, we're going to try to pull together a list and provide that back to you at the end of the conference. Thank you.